There are certain opinions about cinema that carry more weight than others, not because they were delivered with confidence, but because they came from a filmmaker who spent over 6 decades studying, dissecting, and creating motion pictures at the highest level of the craft. Woody Allen was one of those filmmakers, prolific almost beyond comparison, having written and directed dozens of films across genres ranging from screwball comedy to somber European-influenced drama. Allen built his career not simply by making movies, but by obsessively studying the films that came before him, absorbing lessons from directors whose work he considered untouchable. Allen never handed out praise carelessly. He understood, better than almost any filmmaker of his generation, exactly how difficult it was to create something genuinely great. Having spent decades chasing a standard he readily admitted he rarely believed he had fully reached himself. When asked which films influenced him most, he didn't simply reach for popular consensus picks. He thought carefully about which films had actually changed the way he understood the medium, which directors had shown him something he hadn't previously believed possible on screen. At 90 years old, Allen finally offered his complete and honest answer. 5 films that left the deepest impression on him across a lifetime, spent both studying and creating cinema. He has often said that revisiting these films late in life felt different than his younger viewings, that decades of his own filmmaking experience revealed technical and emotional layers he hadn't fully appreciated as a young man first encountering them in dark repertory theaters across New York. This is the story of the 5 greatest movies Woody Allen ever saw. Number 5. The Bicycle Thief. Directed by Vittorio De Sica and released in 1948, this Italian neo-realist film followed a poor father and his young son searching desperately through the streets of post-war Rome for a stolen bicycle, the family's only means of earning a living. Allen often cited the film as a formative example of how simplicity, stripped of any theatrical excess, could produce devastating emotional power. What struck him most wasn't a dramatic plot twist or elaborate visual technique. It was the film's unflinching honesty, its willingness to sit with ordinary human desperation without resorting to sentimentality or manufactured resolution. Allen credited De Sica's approach with shaping his own understanding that the smallest, most mundane human struggles could carry as much dramatic weight as any grand narrative, provided a filmmaker approached them with genuine honesty rather than spectacle. He often said that no film taught him more about restraint, about trusting an audience to feel something without being told exactly how to feel it. Allen frequently pointed to the film's final sequence as one of the most emotionally devastating moments in cinema history, achieved through the simplest possible means. A father and son walking together through an indifferent crowd, their circumstances unchanged, but their relationship irrevocably altered by what had just occurred between them. Number 4. Rashomon. Akira Kurosawa's 1950 film, which told the story of a single crime through 4 contradictory perspectives, left an enormous impression on Allen for reasons that extended well beyond its innovative narrative structure. What fascinated him most was Kurosawa's willingness to leave audiences without a definitive resolution, forcing viewers to sit with genuine ambiguity about truth, memory, and human motivation. Allen often described the film as one of the earliest and most successful examples of a director trusting an audience's intelligence completely, refusing to simplify a complicated idea about the unreliability of human perception into something more comfortable or conventional. He credited Rashomon with expanding his own sense of what narrative structure in film could accomplish, proof that a story didn't need a single clear resolution to feel complete, and that ambiguity itself could become one of a film's most powerful tools when handled with sufficient craft and confidence. Allen also admired Kurosawa's visual command of the material. The way natural light filtering through a forest canopy became almost a character in its own right, reinforcing the film's larger themes about the impossibility of ever achieving a single, objective version of the truth. Number 3. Wild Strawberries. Ingmar Bergman's 1957 film, following an aging professor confronting his own mortality and the emotional wreckage of his past relationships through a series of dreams and memories, held a particularly personal significance for Allen throughout his career. Bergman remained one of the filmmakers Allen studied most obsessively, and Wild Strawberries represented, in his view, the clearest example of Bergman's ability to translate deeply internal psychological experience into visual language without ever feeling forced or overly literary. What Allen admired most was the film's fearless examination of regret, isolation, and the passage of time, themes he would return to repeatedly throughout his own filmmaking career, often quite directly influenced by Bergman's specific visual and narrative techniques. Allen frequently acknowledged Bergman as perhaps the single greatest influence on his own approach to serious filmmaking, and he considered Wild Strawberries the film that most clearly demonstrated why that influence ran so deep, a meditation on aging and self-reckoning that never once felt didactic or heavy-handed despite its weighty subject matter. He often said that Bergman's willingness to blend dream logic with grounded realism, without ever fully explaining where one ended and the other began, gave him a model for handling his own later films that explored memory, regret, and mortality with similar tonal ambition. Number 2. ATF. Federico Fellini's 1963 film, an autobiographical fantasy following a filmmaker experiencing a creative and personal crisis while attempting to make his next picture, represented for Allen one of the most audacious and successful examples of a director turning his own artistic struggles into genuine cinematic art. What impressed Allen most wasn't simply the film's technical inventiveness, though its blending of memory, fantasy, and reality remained remarkably ambitious even decades after its release. It was Fellini's willingness to be genuinely vulnerable on screen, exposing his own creative anxieties and personal contradictions without any protective irony or self-flattery. Allen often described ATF as a film that gave him permission, as a young filmmaker studying the craft, to believe that deeply personal, even self-critical material could still produce something universally resonant. He credited Fellini's example with encouraging him to draw more directly from his own anxieties and neuroses in his later work, understanding that genuine vulnerability, handled with sufficient craft, could become a film's greatest strength rather than a limitation to be hidden from audiences. Allen also noted the sheer technical audacity of the film's dreamlike sequences, moments that blurred the line between the protagonist's fantasies and his lived reality so seamlessly that audiences were never quite certain which version of events they were actually witnessing. Number 1. Citizen Kane. Of every film Allen studied throughout his life, none held quite the same significance as Orson Welles' 1941 masterpiece, a film he described repeatedly throughout his career as essentially unmatched in its combination of technical innovation and genuine narrative depth. What struck Allen most about Citizen Kane wasn't a single element in isolation, but the sheer completeness of Welles' vision, a 25-year-old first-time director somehow mastering cinematography, narrative structure, sound design, and performance simultaneously in a way that reshaped what an entire generation of filmmakers believed the medium could accomplish. Allen often pointed to specific technical innovations, the deep focus cinematography, the non-linear storytelling built around fragmented memory and unreliable narration, as achievements that remain genuinely startling even after decades of subsequent filmmakers attempting to replicate them. But what elevated the film beyond mere technical achievement, in Allen's estimation, was its emotional core. A genuinely tragic examination of ambition, isolation, and the impossibility of ever truly knowing another human being. Themes that resonated with him throughout his own career as he continually returned to questions of identity, self-deception, and the masks people wear in their daily lives. Allen frequently said that watching Citizen Kane as a young man convinced him that cinema could achieve the same depth and complexity as the greatest literature, a realization that fundamentally shaped his decision to pursue filmmaking as a serious artistic pursuit rather than simple entertainment. He often returned to the film's central irony, that a story built around uncovering the true meaning of a dying man's final word ultimately revealed how fundamentally unknowable another person's inner life truly remains, regardless of how much information is gathered about them, a theme Allen considered as relevant to his own work decades later, as it had been the first time he encountered it. Looking back across these 5 films, a clear pattern emerges in what Allen valued most as both a student of cinema and a filmmaker in his own right. The Bicycle Thief taught him the power of restraint and honest simplicity in depicting human struggle. Rashomon expanded his understanding of narrative ambiguity and trust in an audience's intelligence. Wild Strawberries demonstrated how deeply personal psychological material could be translated into universal visual language. 8NFEF gave him permission to draw vulnerability and self-examination directly into his own work. And Citizen Kane, more than any other film, convinced him that cinema itself could achieve genuine artistic depth comparable to the greatest works of literature and theater. Allen has spent much of his career expressing genuine humility about his own body of work, frequently stating that he never fully achieved the standards set by the films that shaped his understanding of the medium. But in his more reflective moments, these were the 5 films he returned to again and again, the ones whose influence he could trace most directly through his own decades of writing and directing, often quite specifically, down to individual shots or narrative structures he had consciously borrowed and reworked for his own purposes. For audiences who only know Allen through his own extensive filmography, these reflections offer something different, a rare glimpse into the films that shaped one of American cinema's most prolific and influential filmmakers, and a reminder that even the most celebrated creators remain, at heart, students of the work that came before them. It stands as a fitting final statement from a filmmaker who spent his entire career borrowing, questioning, and reworking the lessons of those who came before him, never quite believing he had matched them, but always grateful for what their example had made possible in his own work.